The weight of Wednesday. The fluorescent lights of Callaway's market had a way of making everything look a little worse than it was: the produce, the linoleum floor, the faces of people who had been on their feet since before sunrise. Sarah Callahan was one of those faces. She stood at register 4 with $18 on her debit card and a folded paper voucher in her hand, the kind issued by the County Health Assistance Office and printed on paper so thin it felt like an apology. In the cart beside her, Emma sat upright in the fold-down child seat, her small chest rising and falling with a faint wheeze that Sarah had learned to monitor the way some mothers monitored fevers constantly, quietly, without showing fear. The inhaler was gone. They had used the last dose that morning. Emma still half asleep, Sarah crouching beside the bed counting the seconds until her daughter's breathing eased. She had been counting seconds like that for 7 years. "I just need to call the manager to process it manually," the cashier said. She was young, maybe 19, and had the look of someone who wanted very much to be helpful, but wasn't sure she was allowed to be. "The system keeps flagging the medication code." "It shouldn't take long." "That's fine," Sarah said. "Take your time." She placed her hand over Emma's and waited. Behind her, someone exhaled loudly. Then, a few seconds later, a voice clear, unhurried, designed to carry. "Some people really have no sense of where they belong." Sarah didn't turn around. She kept her hand on Emma's. She kept her face neutral. She had practice at this, years of it, whole shifts of it, the particular discipline of a woman who could not afford to react. But near the pharmacy counter, half hidden behind a rotating display of reading glasses, a silver-haired woman in a plain wool coat had gone very still. She had heard every word. And unlike everyone else in that checkout line, she knew exactly who had said it and who was being made to stand there and absorb it. She set down the box of crackers she had been holding and began walking forward slowly, eyes steady, waiting to see how far this would go. Act 1, The World as It Is. Sarah Callahan had been working the night shift at the Hargrove Grand for 3 years. She knew the hotel the way you know a place you clean but never stay in, by its baseboards and grout lines, its linen closets and service corridors, the particular squeak of the housekeeping cart on the 14th floor. She knew which rooms the guests trashed and which ones they barely touched. She knew that the penthouse bathrooms had heated floors and that the staff bathroom on sublevel 2 had a broken lock that maintenance had been promising to fix since March. She did not know the names of the guests. That was not her job. Her job was to make the rooms look like no one had ever been in them, to erase all evidence of ordinary human living and replace it with the illusion of perfection. She was good at it. She was fast, thorough, and she never complained, which her floor supervisor, Deb, appreciated enough to occasionally cover for her when Emma's school called and Sarah had to step outside for 10 minutes. The rest of her life ran on a similar system, contained, efficient, stripped of anything that wasn't essential. She woke at 5:30, got Emma dressed and fed, dropped her at the before-school program that cost $40 a week she did not technically have, then caught the 6:14 bus to the hotel. She worked until 2, sometimes 3 if someone called out. She picked Emma up. She made dinner, usually something from whatever was marked down at Callaway's. She helped with homework, did the breathing treatment if Emma needed it, and was in bed by 9:30 so she could do it again. She did not think of this as hardship. She thought of it as Tuesday. What she didn't tell anyone, not Deb, not her neighbor Mrs. Okafor, who sometimes watched Emma in emergencies, was that the voucher system had been glitching for 6 weeks. The county had switched software platforms and half the pharmacy codes weren't transferring correctly. Sarah had called the assistance office 3 times. Each time she was told it was being resolved. Each time she came to the pharmacy and it wasn't. She had been paying out of pocket for Emma's antihistamines. The inhaler was different, it was the one she couldn't stretch. So on Wednesday morning, when Emma woke up wheezing and the last dose was gone, Sarah had made a calculation, the way she always made calculations: bus fare versus cab fare, overtime versus childcare, risk versus risk. She had decided to try the voucher one more time, at the front register instead of the pharmacy counter, with a different cashier who might be able to override it manually. She had told Emma they were going on an errand. "Can we get the orange juice? The kind with the pulp?" "Maybe. Let's see how we do." Emma had accepted this with the easy pragmatism of a child who had learned early that maybe was her mother's word for, "I'm trying." The woman behind Sarah in line at Register 4 was Diana Hargrove. Sarah did not know this when she first heard the exhale. She didn't know it when she heard the remark about belonging. She only knew there was a woman behind her expensive coat, expensive bag, the kind of stillness that came from never having to hurry, who had decided that 2 minutes of inconvenience was an injustice worth announcing. Sarah kept her eyes forward. The cashier, her name tag, said Brianna, was on the phone with the manager, speaking quietly, nodding. Emma had started tracing a pattern on the back of Sarah's hand with her finger, the way she did when she was trying to be patient. "Mama, what's pulp?" "It's the little pieces of orange." "From squeezing it." "Oh." A pause. "I like pulp." "I know you do." The manager arrived, a man named Greg, with a lanyard and the expression of someone who had already decided the shape of this situation before he'd heard a word of it. He looked at the voucher. He looked at his screen. He looked at the woman in the cashmere coat behind Sarah. "Ma'am," he said, and it took Sarah a half-second to realize he was talking to her. "I can take you over to the service desk. We can process it there. Just takes a couple extra minutes, and it'll free up." "She's been waiting," Brianna said quietly. Greg looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at her register. "It's fine," Sarah said. She said it not because it was fine. She said it because arguing with Greg was not going to get Emma's inhaler any faster, and because she could feel Diana Hargrove's impatience behind her like a change in air pressure, and because Emma was watching. She pushed the cart toward the service desk. She heard Diana's voice clearly as they moved away, not shouting, not even particularly sharp, just the particular confidence of someone who had never been told their words cost anything. Honestly, the system enables this. People who can't afford a place like this shouldn't be blocking the line for people who can. A few people in line shifted their weight. No one spoke. That was the part Sarah felt longest, not the words, but the silence after them, wide and shared and unbroken. Act 2. The Cost of Silence. Diana Hargrove was not, by her own estimation, a cruel person. She was direct. She had standards. She believed that clarity, even uncomfortable clarity, was a form of respect, and that the current cultural habit of softening every hard truth was a kind of collective dishonesty she refused to participate in. She had said as much at 3 separate dinner parties in the past year, and each time the table had nodded in that particular way that told her she was right. She had come to Callaway's Market because her personal assistant had the day off and she needed sparkling water, a specific brand, imported, that the hotel kitchen kept running out of, because the procurement manager was apparently incapable of reading a standing order. She had not planned to be here for more than 7 minutes. She had a 10 o'clock. The wait at Register 4 had been 2 minutes and 40 seconds. She knew because she'd checked her phone twice. It wasn't the wait itself that irritated her. It was the principle, the slow, cumulative weight of systems that rewarded dysfunction. The voucher programs, the manual overrides, the apologetic cashiers who didn't know how to move things along. Someone had to say it. She had simply been the one willing to. She did not notice the silver-haired woman near the pharmacy counter moving closer. At the service desk, the older employee, his badge, said Roy, was working through the override with the focused patience of someone who had done this before and understood that the system was broken and that wasn't the customer's fault. "Should have it in just a second," he said. "The new software's been giving everyone grief. You're not the first this week." "Thank you," Sarah said. Emma had found a loose thread on her jacket sleeve and was winding it around her finger, then unwinding it. Sarah watched her daughter's chest, the rise, the fall, the faint catch at the top of each inhale that meant the airways were tight, but not yet in crisis. She had maybe another hour before the wheeze became something more serious. Diana had followed them. Not all the way, she was still 10 feet back, near the end cap display of seasonal items, ostensibly reading the back of something she had no intention of buying. But her voice carried, aimed at no one in particular, and therefore aimed at everyone. It's not just the weight, it's the entitlement. The assumption that the rest of us should reorganize our day because the system is being gamed. A woman near the deli counter glanced over, then away. A man in a delivery uniform studied his phone. One older gentleman in the line actually turned to look at Diana, then at Sarah, then back at his groceries and said nothing. The silence closed back over everything like water. Roy kept typing. Sarah kept her hand on the cart. "Mama," Emma said, her voice careful. "Is she talking about us again?" "Don't worry about her." "But she keeps." "Emma." Sarah's voice was gentle but final. "Look at me." Emma looked up. "We're getting your medicine. That's what we're doing right now. Everything else is just noise." Emma held her mother's gaze for a moment, then nodded. She went back to the thread on her sleeve. Sarah turned back to Roy and the screen, and she did the thing she had trained herself to do in situations like this. She narrowed her world down to the task directly in front of her. The override, the code, the inhaler. She made herself very small and very focused, and she waited. Diana moved closer. Later, Sarah would not be able to say exactly why, whether it was boredom, or the absence of pushback, or something more calculated. But Diana drifted from the end cap to the edge of the service counter, close enough now that her voice no longer needed to carry. "You work at the Hargrove Grand, don't you?" Sarah went still. She turned slowly. Diana was looking at her with an expression that was almost pleasant, the particular pleasantness of someone who had decided they were making an observation rather than an attack. "Housekeeping," Diana said. "Night shift. My mother-in-law sent a commendation memo last quarter. Apparently one of the night staff reported a water leak on 14 before it did real damage. The name was on the incident form. I remember faces." A brief pause, almost gracious. "I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just think it's interesting. My husband's family owns the hotel where you work. And here we are." She tilted her head slightly. "I imagine it's difficult. The hours, the pay." Another pause, brief, deliberate. "That's actually the problem with these assistance programs, you know. They make it too easy to stay in situations that aren't working. If the support wasn't there, people would be forced to figure something else out." Roy had stopped typing. The service desk had gone very quiet. Sarah felt something move through her chest, not anger exactly, more like the specific exhaustion of a person who has had to be careful for so long that even the decision to stay careful takes effort. She thought about Greg, who had apologized with his mouth and then done the wrong thing with his hands. She thought about the people in line who had shifted their weight and said nothing. She thought about Emma, who was 7 years old and sitting 2 feet away, learning, right now, what adults did when someone spoke to another person this way. She said, "Roy, how much longer?" 2 minutes, Roy said. His voice was flat. His jaw was tight. "Thank you." Diana made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You know what your problem is? You've been told your whole life that this kind of—" "Mama." Emma's voice was small. Not scared, something worse than scared. Confused. Both women looked at her. Emma was looking at Diana with the direct, unguarded attention of a child who hadn't yet learned to hide her face. Then she looked at her mother. "She said you were a ban using the system." Emma struggled to find the right shape for it. "What does that mean?" Sarah crouched down to her daughter's level. She was aware of every person within earshot. She was aware of the tightness in her own chest that had nothing to do with asthma. "It means she doesn't understand our life," Sarah said quietly. "And that's okay. Not everyone has to." Diana's voice came from above them, even, unhurried, aimed at the middle distance. "A child raised by someone who depends on handouts will grow up thinking that's normal. That's not cruelty, that's just statistics." The store was very quiet. Emma looked up at her mother. Her brow was furrowed in the particular way it got when something didn't make sense to her, when the world was behaving in a way her 7 years of experience hadn't prepared her for. "Mama," she said, "did I do something wrong?" The question landed the way those questions do, not loudly, but completely. It filled every corner of the space around them. Sarah looked at her daughter. She felt the back of her throat tighten. She felt her eyes go warm, in a way she had not allowed them to go all morning, through the alarm, and the wheezing, and the bus, and the voucher, and Greg, and all of it. She opened her mouth to answer, and then, from somewhere just behind Diana, a calm voice said, "No, sweetheart, you didn't do a single thing wrong." Act 3. What Truth Costs. Margaret Hargrove was 71 years old and had spent the better part of 5 decades watching people mistake wealth for wisdom. She had built the Hargrove Group from 2 hotels and a lot of borrowed money. She had buried a husband, raised 2 sons, and sat across negotiating tables from men who assumed her silence was agreement. She had learned slowly, at some cost, the difference between patience and complicity. She came to Callaway's Market every Wednesday morning, not because she had to. She had a household staff and a standing delivery account and a personal assistant who managed everything from her dry cleaning to her dental appointments. She came because her late husband had believed, and she had eventually come to agree, that you lost something important when you stopped moving through the ordinary world, when you stopped standing in lines and carrying your own groceries and existing, briefly, as just another person in a store. She bought her blood pressure medication here. She bought the good crackers that her doctor had told her to cut back on. She sometimes bought flowers, the inexpensive kind in the plastic sleeves, because they made the kitchen table look like someone lived there. She had been near the pharmacy counter when she heard Diana's first remark. She had begun moving closer, slowly, giving the situation room to resolve itself the way she had learned to do in boardrooms, in family arguments, in all the places where stepping in too early could make things worse instead of better. But she had kept moving, and she had heard everything. She had watched Sarah navigate at the service desk, Roy's patient fingers on the keyboard, the particular discipline of a woman keeping herself together in front of her child. She had watched the people in the store do nothing. She had watched Greg do worse than nothing. And she had watched Emma ask her mother if she had done something wrong. That was the moment Margaret stopped waiting. Diana heard the footsteps and turned. The expression that crossed her face lasted less than a second, a flicker of something that might have been surprise, or calculation, or the specific unease of a person who has just realized the audience was larger than they thought. Then it was gone, replaced by the composed, pleasant surface she wore like a second coat. "Margaret," she said, "I didn't know you." "Greg." Margaret's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It had the quality of certain sounds, a door closing, a phone ringing in a quiet room that cut through ambient noise simply by being deliberate. Greg, who had retreated toward Register 4 after his role in the morning's events, reappeared at the edge of the service area, smoothing the front of his vest as he came. "Mrs. Hargrove, get the camera footage from the last 15 minutes pulled and saved. Then process this woman's prescription immediately." Margaret did not look at him as she said it. She was looking at Roy, who had already turned back to his keyboard with the relieved efficiency of someone who had been waiting for permission to do the right thing. "Yes, ma'am," Roy said. "Yes, ma'am," Greg said, quieter. Margaret turned to Diana. The 2 women looked at each other. Around them, the store had gone genuinely, attentively still, the kind of silence that happens when people sense they are watching something real. "We should talk outside," Diana said. Her voice was measured, reasonable. "I was simply making a point about, I know what you were doing." Margaret's voice was not unkind. It was something more uncomfortable than unkind, it was certain. "I have been standing in this store for 10 minutes. I heard every word." A pause. "You've embarrassed yourself, Diana. More than that." She glanced briefly at Emma, then back. "You've done it in front of a child." Diana opened her mouth, closed it. "We'll discuss the rest at home," Margaret said. And then, quietly, only for Diana, "But understand that I was here. I cannot pretend otherwise. And I won't." Diana left without her sparkling water. Roy slid the inhaler across the counter with the receipt. Sarah signed the override form 3 lines, her name, the date, a checkbox, and tucked the medication into the outside pocket of her bag where she could reach it fast if she needed to. Emma watched the whole transaction with the focused attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. Margaret waited until Roy had stepped away. Then she came to stand beside Sarah at the counter, not in front of her, not above her, beside her. "I'm Margaret Hargrove," she said. "Thomas is my son. Diana is his wife." Sarah looked at her. She had wondered, in the last few minutes, watching this woman move through the store with that particular quiet authority, who she was, what she wanted. Now she knew, and the knowing settled over her with a complicated weight. "I work for your family," Sarah said. "I know. Night shift, housekeeping, 3rd year." Margaret said it plainly, without apology. "I reviewed the staffing reports last month. There were some irregularities I wanted to understand better." Sarah was quiet. "The overtime," Margaret said. The hours logged without supplemental pay. The scheduling patterns on certain floors. She paused. I had questions already. What happened this morning gives me a different kind of reason to ask them. Emma had climbed partway out of the cart seat and was now standing in it, holding the handlebar, watching Margaret with open curiosity. You're old, Emma said, with the frank honesty of someone who considered this a neutral observation. Emma, Sarah said. It's all right, Margaret said. A brief, genuine smile. I am. She looked back at Sarah. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you answer, I will make sure Roy's camera footage goes to HR this afternoon, and that your prescription is fully covered going forward through the hotel's employee health plan, which you should have been enrolled in 18 months ago, and weren't, which is one of the irregularities I mentioned. Sarah looked at her steadily. What's the question? Will you put what happened this morning in writing? Formally. The comments, the service desk, Greg's decision to move you. Margaret held her gaze. I won't pretend it carries no risk for you. I'd be insulting your intelligence. But I want you to know that I'm asking, because I intend to act on it, not file it. The store had mostly returned to its ordinary rhythm around them. Someone's cartwheel squeaked. The PA system crackled with a price check on something in aisle 7. Sarah looked at Emma. She felt her fingers tighten against the strap of her bag, one small, involuntary movement. Then she breathed out and made herself be still. Emma was looking back at her with an expression that asked nothing and offered everything, the absolute, uncomplicated faith of a child in the person who had always been there. Sarah thought about all the mornings she had gotten up before the sun and made the world look manageable for this child. All the times she had said it's fine and don't worry and everything's okay while calculating, behind her eyes, exactly how not okay things were. All the times she had absorbed something and kept moving because the alternative, stopping, reacting, being seen, felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought about Emma's question, asked in a quiet voice in a grocery store, with complete sincerity. Did I do something wrong? She thought about what it would mean for her daughter to watch her answer that question by saying nothing. Yes, Sarah said. I'll put it in writing. 3 weeks later, after the forms were filed and the meetings were held and the process moved forward with the slow, grinding seriousness of things that are actually going to happen, the internal audit at the Hargrove Grand identified scheduling violations affecting 11 housekeeping employees across 2 floors. The supplemental overtime was calculated and settled. A new HR liaison position was created specifically for non-salaried staff, reporting directly to Margaret's office. Greg was suspended pending review and eventually reassigned to a property in another state. Brianna, the cashier, who had quietly said she's been waiting, was promoted to shift supervisor at the end of the quarter. Diana Hargrove retained her title but lost her seat on the Hargrove Family Foundation Board, a quiet removal described in the internal memo as a restructuring of governance roles. She did not attend the foundation's winter gala. Those who knew the family understood that Margaret Hargrove's quiet removals were, in their way, more final than any scene could have been. Sarah received a formal contract revision, daytime shift availability, enrollment in the employee health plan, and eligibility for the Hargrove Staff Education Stipend, a program that covered 60% of accredited vocational training costs. She enrolled in a licensed nursing assistant program the following month. The hotel arranged overnight childcare on her class nights through a provider already contracted with the staff benefits office. She did not think of these things as victory. She thought of them as correction. On the evening after she signed the formal complaint, Sarah and Emma took the number 9 bus home. It was a Wednesday, which meant the bus was half empty. The after-work crowd had already thinned, and the seats by the window were free. Emma chose the one with the best view of the highway overpass, which she had recently decided was her favorite part of the route because of the way the light hit it at dusk. The inhaler was in Sarah's bag. Emma's breathing was easy. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emma turned from the window. Mama, were you scared today? At the store? Sarah considered the question seriously, the way she always tried to when Emma asked something real. Yes, she said. I was scared. Emma absorbed this. But you still talked. Yes. Why? Sarah looked at her daughter, the small, serious face, the shadows of a long day still around her eyes, the absolute trust that her mother's answer would be worth waiting for. Because you were watching, Sarah said, and I didn't want you to remember me as someone who went quiet when it counted. Emma thought about this for the rest of the block. Then she leaned her head against her mother's arm and said nothing else, which was its own kind of answer. Outside the bus window, the overpass caught the last of the evening light and held it orange and amber, and briefly, improbably gold. Sarah watched it pass. She did not try to stop the tears when they came. She just let them fall, quiet and unhurried, while her daughter breathed easy beside her and the city moved past the glass. Some things you hold together for long enough that when you finally let them go, you barely notice the sound they make. She noticed. It was softer than she expected. And,